Chapter 129 to 130. With the demise of 1,000 high-ranked IWA ninjas, the war came to a screeching halt. IWA was put on a heavy stopper since their ranks suffered immensely and their overall power dropped. Plus, the families of strong and influential ninjas were usually other strong and influential ninjas. Needless to say, Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Butcher, as they started to call him in IWA, became the public enemy number one. Despite everyone in IWA wanting nothing more than to kill him, they didn't have enough power to continue the war. Many died, a lot of money was wasted, the country became poorer, and the daimyo was pushing for the war to end for almost half-year now. The loss of 1,000 ninjas was just the last straw. A very painful last straw at that. IWA ceased all hostilities. Sunagakure gained a considerable edge at this time, and could push deeper in Land of Earth territory, but they had their own problems. The new Kazekage, Raza, was utterly incapable of having a cordial relationship with the Wind Daimyo. In short, the village suffered a shortage of supplies and lacked monetary support. Rei thought the Wind Daimyo was an idiot since the second Suna lost the war. His head would roll and the Land of Wind would either get a new ruler or collapse into a brutal civil war between the various nobles and their territories in the country. Both options were quite nasty. Alas, the Wind leadership just didn't see it. This made Raza unable to continue the war and also cease all hostilities with IWA. In short, Suna was now out of the war, and exactly nothing changed between IWA and Suna from what was before the war. No borders were redrawn, no monetary satisfaction was paid, nothing. The war was a complete waste of time and lives. The only thing that really changed was that both villages were now weaker, this having a much worse effect on IWA than Suna. Then again, Suna was much weaker than IWA initially anyway. Kumo was complicated. They wanted to continue warring, if only against Konoha, but since the third Raikage died, the new Raikage wanted to hear nothing about a more offensive approach. Especially after the debacle near the shores of the Land of Earth, where thousands of Kumo troops were destroyed by mercenaries of all things. That sealed the deal and Kumo became defensive in nature. As for Konoha, nothing changed. Through the entirety of the war, they were on the hard defensive, creating stalemates and barricading their enemies from attempting to cross the border of the Land of Fire. Rivers of blood flowed to ensure the war was fought in smaller countries between the major nations. And while the war was as good as over when Minato triumphed against Iwa's last offensive, for the next few months, a sort of a Cold War continued since no peace treaty was signed. The date of such signing was currently in a month in the Land of Iron. Half-year the countries just sat on their eggs, watching and waiting for what would happen while trying to preserve whatever strength they had remaining. And when they realized their enemies had no strength to continue, only then was decided the war would end. Konoha, however, cemented their position as the strongest nation and as the one that came out on the top in this conflict. The second Minato became the fourth Hokage. There was an incredible blockade to that by the Uchiha clan that wanted one of their own as Hokage, the Hyuga that wanted a clan ninja other than an Uchiha as the Hokage, and surprisingly by the Aburame and Inuzuka clans that didn't think having someone with such a ridiculous bingo book picture should represent the village. After all, Minato did become a sort of a laughing stock all over the nations despite his SS rank. One peek at his bingo book picture, and nobody would take him seriously. This meant Minato was on the edge. The most influential clans didn't want anything but say fuck you to his face for various reasons, while the third Hokage, Jiraiya, and many clanless shinobi wanted him in the office. Surprisingly, the Inoshikako clans decided to stay strictly neutral in this conflict. Well, the Nara clan did, and everybody knew who called shots in that particular alliance. And then, much to Yuzora's amusement, it all came crashing to the decision of the Senju clan. With the influence Tsunade's clan had in Konoha, her word could either make or end Minato's career. And Tsunade did exactly as was expected of her. She safeguarded Rei's interests, and made sure to get a whole lot of concessions for herself by giving Minato her vote. In short, come the next war, she would not even be expected to help Konoha, and they were utterly unable to make a missing nin out of her. Considering the economical advantages in favor of the Bairi company she asked for, Minato ended up wanting to rip his hair out after that particular meeting with old blonde greedy hag. Needless to say, he underestimated the range of Tsunade's hearing and was reprimanded for such an insult. Poor lad couldn't leave his bed for a week due to pain. Thankfully, it took only a week for Hiruzen, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and the entire council to succeed in begging Tsunade to finally heal Minato's injuries that even the best of the best medic ninjas in the village couldn't heal. The second the war officially ended, Tsunade would be out of the village too, without anyone being able to stop her, no matter what kind of law or regulation they pull. No way was Rei having his sweet gentle Tsu in the village when Kyuubi gets ripped out of Kushina, and this way it would at least be all legal, rather than having Tsunade run away and depend on Hiruzen's softness for his students. Minato became the fourth a week after his legs were finally pulled out of his ass. Nobody said Tsunade was particularly merciful, and that meant Konoha had SS-rank ninja as the Kage and the god of shinobi as someone who could move freely. Hokage, after all, could not leave the village for long periods of time, either due to his administrative obligations or because he was the main protector of the village. But with Hiruzen no longer being the Hokage and his newfound ability to be sent into the field, the war really ended in the favor of Konoha. Now it only had to be officially documented. No matter what Kumo would like to proclaim, they didn't have enough firepower to even utter a word against Konoha, and other nations didn't either. In the end, Konoha once again prevailed as exceptional ninjas rose during the conflict, their path paved by the rivers of Konoha fresh blood. As usual, and while the other nations were preparing to attend the treaty meeting, the Mizukichi was preparing to attend the treaty meeting and schemed one last stunt during this war. After all, no village would have their respective Kage in their village, since every single one of them was heading to the land of iron shortly, and as long as his plan happened before he put his signature on that damn paper saying the war was over, nobody could legally say anything to Kirigakura about being underhanded. As if he left the killing of Himino unanswered. Little did the Mizukichi and the other leaders of villages knew. He was not the only one seeking to take advantage of Kageless villages. Sunagakure was in turmoil. Stormy clouds dark as night gathered above it, creating a sight never before seen in the village where rain never fell. The entire village was covered in a blanket of shadow, not even one ray of light getting through the clouds that sparkled and roared with barely contained lightning. The ninjas of Suna ran left and right, evacuating civilians, trying to find out what was happening, trying to find out whoever was responsible. And then it started. Rainstorm fell like drops of water, as big as eyeballs cropped the Sunagakure, desecrating its name as now the village looked more to be hidden in the flood of water. Karahiko, what did you find out? Pakura screamed through the deafening sound of rain and lighting raging all around, not enjoying being literally bathed in water due to the rain. She even had to use water walking if she didn't want to have her feet ankle-deep in the water. Karahiko, one of the best sensors of Sunagakure, was completely shaken. The water level was ever so slowly rising, and he really didn't want to find out what would happen once the lighting started raining down instead of staying in the clouds. Not when the entire village was flooded by water. The storm. It was almost painful for him to convey his findings. The storm is natural, he said, completely defeated. Pakura's mood soured as she heard that. Natural, that meant no chakra was in the clouds or water, which meant there was no hope that defeating the caster would stop it. They couldn't even send wind techniques at the clouds, since they were too high up in the sky, and their techniques wouldn't reach. Pakura quickly created 30 small, marble-sized orbs of scorch release, and moved them around her to evaporate the water in the hope to keep the flood level down. No, there is no way this is natural, Pakura thought in dismay. Downpour. It hit her. The only ninjas who could do this were Rei and Conan of Kiri. That was not so hard to realize considering only they were famous for such large-scale water attacks. But what is their goal? Pakura desperately thought, sending even more small orbs of scorch style up in the air, vaporizing the water as it fell. The village was now a mix of vapor that was constantly being riddled with big drops of water and reforming. The sizzling sound of evaporation fought with the deafening fall of the rain. The visibility was nil at best as the blanket of darkness, vapor, and water covered the Sunagakure. The civilians and ninjas alike shook in their boots from all the helplessness and despair, not knowing what to do. Pakura quickly lost command. There was no way to coordinate men when her orders wouldn't go further than a few feet through all the noise around her. She couldn't even use sign language due to the abysmal visibility and vapor that covered the village like a mist. Unfortunately, Suna didn't have mind arts to connect with each other as the Yamanaka clan did, and in this kind of situation, they were plainly fucked and Pakura knew it. Forsaking the defense of the village for a second, Pakura thought what could be the attacker's goal as she continued creating small orbs of scorch to fight the heavy rain. It did create the current situation and maintain the utterly abysmal visibility, but Pakura couldn't stop. That would mean letting the water level increase. Considering there were natural walls of hardened sand around Sunagakure, letting the water level rise could very well end with creating a lake where Sunagakure stood, completely flooding it. And even then Pakura couldn't create enough scorch balls to prevent the water level rise completely. She was able to only slow it down. After all, the village was huge and Pakura could cover a few blocks at best. So the water slowly rose, covering more and more of the village. This had to happen 2 days after the Kazakage left. Pakura gritted her teeth, but then it hit her. There was only one valuable thing Sunagakure had readily available. The bastards are after a chibi. Her eyes widened before hardening. Pushing half of her whole reserves into one massive orb, she guided it far up the sky above the village, and then, using her sheer knowledge of her village, she navigated through the thick vapor towards the main hidden treasury of the village, where the Achibi sealed into a jar was currently held. Rei finished copying most of the high-level jutsu scrolls, and the sealing of 10% of the Tanuki's chakra, and damn was the beast loudly cussing during the process. Rei would naturally leave the Achibi for Suna, as he did up till now. He only needed a sample of its chakra, and honestly, he only took 10% because the sandfuck was just so annoyingly loud. Rei loved hearing the screaming cussing. For Achibi, he even stopped mitigating the pain of chakra absorption after a few seconds in his presence. The Sage of the Six Paths really must have liked them vulgar. Rei shook his head in amusement. He was about to walk away when, on instinct, Rei raised a water wall in time to intercept a ball of scorch release, sending superheated vapor all over the room before Rei blew it away with a burst of wind jutsu. And there she was, the hero of Sunagakure, Pakura of the scorch release, gasping for air with wide eyes betraying how scared she was, meaning the subtle fright-inducing illusion seals inwoven into his black garbs worked, shivering despite the hot air just blowing past her, meaning the chilling illusion seals also worked, but determined to stop him. Cute, Rei thought in amusement. The woman would clearly not give up despite being downright horrified, and wanted nothing other than to faint. "You won't steal a chibi," she cried out, barely capable of doing so without stuttering, and two scorching balls appeared next to her shoulders before they flew at Rei, not even giving him time to answer. "I think I already got what I wanted," Rei quipped and raised his hand in the direction of the incoming balls, and all Pakura could see was white. The entire room was covered in snow. How? She mentally shrieked, noticing her scorching balls freezing of all things, and only then the change in temperature hit her as she barely heard Rei's whisper, before she fainted from the mix of low temperature, fright, stress, and exhaustion. Snow release, snowfield. Rei hummed as his new mix of nature energy, wind, and water release covered the room in the blanket of white snow that had the ability to steadily bring the temperature lower and lower. The temperature in the room was getting chillier by the second, and Pakura's body was horribly shivering despite her being unconscious. Rei could only sigh as he canceled the snowfield. He didn't want to kill Pakura. If anything, she would be a nice addition to his future plans if Sunagakure betrayed her. He didn't want to be a rogue ninja for the rest of his days, and the most prudent way to achieve freedom was to create a village. Modern-styled village, at that. No way would he do all the administrative work himself, as the other Kages do. Pakura was up there with the most important people to secure for this plan, so he couldn't just let her die. Not to mention, he was quite impressed by her determination. Where others would flee with their tail between their legs, she stood her ground. The woman was something else, Rei decided. I guess that kind of foolish bravery will have to be beaten out of her later on. Fighting a battle where she would surely die without even knowing if it was the only way. I am sure Mei would like to have her own apprentice in due time. Rei chuckled, picking her up onto his shoulder before disappearing from the treasury room. The clouds above the Sunagakure finally cleared, letting the ever-present desert sun warm shine on the village as the vapor slowly disappeared, leaving only glittering water flooding the village, reaching up to 3 meters in height. The civilians hiding on the highest floors and ninjas in the streets fell on their butts in relief, thanking whatever deity it was finally over and they survived. Oddly enough, not even one casualty came from this ordeal. On the floor of the highest building in the village, the Kazakage Tower, unconscious Pakura peacefully laid, right under a massive message carved into the roof. Its contents: the Yozora was here.